Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. Over the next 2 hours, we're going to look at a lot of different issues. Matter of fact, in the second hour, we're going to focus almost all of our time and attention on Donald Trump, his trip to Mexico, and his claim that indeed Mexico will pay for the wall. He has produced a memo that explains how he would do that, and whether or not Mexican authorities believe that or not, it will be interesting to look at. And the broader issue of borders in the first place. We also want to focus on a number of other border issues, even in the European Union. So we're going to get into that as well. So a lot in the second hour. But before we do so, in the first hour, I wanted to bring our good friend Stephen Arterburn back. He has a new book out with David Stoop, and also a workshop that goes along with it. The book is entitled Take Your Life Back, How to Stop Letting the Past and Other People Control You. Stephen Arterburn, as you well know, is the chairman of New Life Ministries. He's also the host of the syndicated Christian counseling talk show New Life Live, heard on over 200 radio stations, and also the host of New Life TV. Was the individual that helped bring about the Women of Faith conferences, but also now we'll be talking about this new Take Your Life Back workshop. Stephen Arterburn, welcome back to Point of View.
Well, Kerby, thank you. Always good to be with you, and I always love your introduction, because I think the only thing that you guys don't talk about or cover and vegetables in the home.
And, nothing's off the table, and we love to talk about it. But talking about family and individuals, let's get into this, because I like to cover these from time to time, because we do have people that live what you call a reactive life. And you begin with a familiar story. It's the prodigal son, but you take it a step further in a way that I think would be really helpful to our listeners. So please explain.
Well, a lot of people, as you look at that story, you know, they really see it not so much about the prodigal son acting out, or, you know, the father figure who represents God's grace to us, who is excited about a prodigal coming back. But what they really focus on is a deeper message of the elder brother who is reacting to all of this, and it's so easy for us to look at people that act out and judge them like the boy running off. But really what the prodigal son's elder brother was doing was acting in. It's a much more subtle way of rebelling against God, being judgmental, having an attitude of I'm better than you, being entitled, and demanding something that maybe you're not entitled to. So we try to focus on taking care of our heart issues versus looking out and judging all the obvious things that are wrong with other people. Well, let's look at the subtleties inside our own heart, just as I think the story points out that, you've got to stop looking down on people as a Christian and look in and deal with the only thing that you can deal with, that you're equipped to deal with, and that's yourself.
And again, there are lots of great concepts in the book, and one of those you mentioned just in passing, we'll come back to it. Acting out, we always see that, but you also talk about this idea, as you said, of acting in, and I think you've explained that pretty well, but it also leads up to this idea of what you call reactive living, and that's a very important concept in your book. So let's see if we can define that.
Yeah, well, a lot of people, their whole life is in reaction to something that happened to them earlier in their life. And, or even people that you could say their whole life leans up against a grudge or bitterness or resentment of a father or mother that was there or wasn't there, was there abusively or abandoned or whatever. And, our job is to forgive and to accept and move on, not excuse. That's not our job. But our job is to get rid of, as the standard is, all bitterness and resentment. And when we don't, then everything we do just kind of becomes a reaction to that horrible thing that can't be changed, can't be fixed. And so what we want to do is get out of this reactive lifestyle where everything can trigger us, or we're defending against anything, or we're hurt over everything, to responding to what God wants for us. When we start responding to God and not reacting to other humans or our past or people that try to control us, we have a fulfilled life, a meaningful life in response to God. But I'll tell you, there are so many people that we've worked with who are reacting rather than responding. And they kind of wonder, well, where is that abundant life? Where is God in all this? Because they're just waiting for the next thing to happen that causes them to react and to be defensive and to maybe even go on the offensive out of an unhealed hurt or a trauma that's never been addressed, or simply some area of bitterness that they've refused to deal with so far.
If people go to the website, of course, we have a picture of the book, and you have a marionette on strings. Then when you open up, you have the marionette with the strings broken. And you know as well as I do, Stephen, that there are people that are pulling various listeners' strings right now. They can just say certain things, do certain things. And, of course, like you said, they're tied to what has happened in their past.
Yeah. And I think the first major step that we can take if we want to take our life back is to face the reality of our lives. If you're living in some kind of denial that prevents you from kind of feeling the severity of the pain that you're in, well, you'll never do anything about it. But when we can trust God and surrender to the Lord, when our faith allows us to move not only ahead, but to move a little bit inward where we can take a look at what we really need to deal with, then we've got hope and we can cut those strings. But right now, there's so many people, they're controlled by someone else, or they're controlled by their past, or they're controlled by a habit or a behavior. And our goal, Dave and I, when we wrote this, was to help people find a path and a process toward freedom. Another place in the book that I think maybe is the most valuable place is where we point out that as a child of God, you need to be your own decider and defender and developer.
Yes, I saw
what
that.
I'm talking about is that, some people have given up the decision-making process of their lives. There's no place in the Bible that says when you get married, all of a sudden you're a non-entity and you give up the right to decide for your life. The Bible says for us to submit ourselves one to another. Then it talks about, a woman submitting to a man. Then it talks about a man being willing to die for his wife. And so die to self for his wife. So neither of those, though, means that the guy can't make a choice for himself or she can't make a choice. So you've got to be the decider in your life. You've got to decide, hey, this is where we need to go. And if you give that up, then there's a good chance that you need to take your life back.
Stephen Arterburn with us. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Bill Nye is known as the science guy. His recent YouTube videos make him more of a pro-abortion guy who attempts to argue for abortion on the basis of his scientific understanding. Professors Robert George and Patrick Lee point out in a recent column that it appears the science guy is the one who does not understand logic and science. Bill Nye's videos many times use a non sequitur to make a point. This is a logical fallacy where the conclusion does not follow from the original statement. A good example is his discussion of the many fertilized embryos that do not result in newborn babies. Robert George and Patrick Lee remind us that the fact that many human embryos die at an early stage of development does not mean that they are not embryonic human beings. The high rate of infant mortality in many parts of the country doesn't mean that these infants. The core of his video is an attempt to pit real life have nothing more than deeply held beliefs based upon a book written 5,000 years ago that says that when a man and a woman have sexual intercourse, they always have a baby. Is any of this true? Many who are pro-life have come to that conclusion apart from the Bible, but based upon the scientific fact that a human being begins at fertilization. Even the oldest parts of the Bible weren't written 5,000 years ago. What about his last statement? Robert George and Patrick Lee remind us that no one who is familiar with the Bible would dream of attributing to any such nonsense because it prominently includes stories of married couples such as Abraham and Sarah who desire for children to be frustrated by infertility. This video illustrates the lengths to which pro-abortion advocates must go in order to make their case. Science and logic are actually on the side of those who are pro-life. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Stephen Arterburn, co-author of the book with David Stoop, Take Your Life Back. It is published by Tyndale. Look for it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link to newlife.com where you can find some information. And if you're listening right now and there's something or someone that continues to exert power over your life, this is really why this book and even the workshop was put together. First part of the book deals with the reactive life. We're talking about that. And then the second part, the responsive life. And Stephen, maybe what we need to do is for just a minute help people understand maybe the idea of woundedness, because some people might say, well, I'm doing pretty good, but you do spend a fair amount of time talking about the various kinds of abuse and wounds and even shame that people have in their lives.
Yes, and that's a perfect place to start, especially after listening to your viewpoint on Bill Nye and all of the pro-abortion voices out there. You know, the fact is, I paid for an abortion when I was younger, and my life really became a reactive life. And here's what I thought. You know, I didn't really understand what I was doing until a few days later. It just hit me that I, as a man, was designed to protect any life that I created. And I not only didn't protect that life, I moved to destroy that life. So I went into this place of deep, deep shame. I felt horrible. I felt like I had kind of out-sinned God's grace. And so I embarked on a journey out of shame to prove to God that no one would ever feel worse about this than me. I thought that's what God wanted for me. But then I realized that is not what God wanted for me. That's what Satan wanted for me. He wanted me to stay condemned, stay in a place of shame and self-condemnation, whereas Jesus went to a lot of trouble for me to be free from that. And I heard someone say, well, your past can end 1 second ago. And I thought that's really what God wants me to do, not to forget what I have done, but also not live in the shame from it. And so a lot of people get wounded by somebody else. I wounded myself. It was a self-inflicted wound, and it took me several years to realize that I wasn't doing anyone any good by staying locked up in that shame, which I was all of my life became a reaction to that shame. When I accepted Christ's forgiveness, I mean, I had accepted Christ a long time ago and wandered, but then I finally accepted his grace and the payment that he paid for me, then my life started to change. I started to take my life back rather than allow Satan to continue to control it with shame. And there are a lot of people I've met over the years, just like me. We don't need a research project. We don't need to determine when life begins. We have been involved in an abortion, and the aftermath of that, the emotional deprivation and trauma from it, is proof enough to us that what we did was absolutely wrong, but not so wrong that God can't forgive it. And you know, you mentioned the workshop. You know, we do these intensives, New Life does, and we have one called Take Your Life Back on October the 21st. Well, I've heard people that have come. I can think of 2 women right now. They went to one of these, and we fly in Christian counselors from all over the country. So you're not just listening to someone speak. But this woman, 2 women stood up, and one said 25 years, one said 30. She said, I have not said the word abortion in 30 years after I had one because of the shame. And she said, I came here, and now I'm standing up in front of you guys telling you for the first time in 30 years, I am free from the condemnation for that. That's what I think God wants for us. And if you are owned by shame, if there is something that you did that has defined your life, we want to help you take it back. And the book, Take Your Life Back, does that. It's a path and a process that we know will bring you a new life, and it will be a fulfilled life.
About 200 pages in the book, and again, it's published by Tyndale. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we have, of course, a link to New Life where you can get it from them as well. And Stephen, we've been talking about, of course, you know, you might use one example, but we're also talking about mental abuse and emotional abuse and physical abuse and all the rest. Yeah. And a lot of this comes from the way we react to it. In some cases, we minimize it, we comply with it, we deny it. Talk about that, because there are probably some listeners right now that maybe you're opening up a wound that they didn't know was there. Or in the case of the woman you just mentioned a minute ago, I've never really come to terms with abortion. I just simply don't talk about it anymore. So how do people deal with that pain or that shame?
Well, you know, as I said earlier, you really need to be able to look at the reality of your life, and you need to ask, hey, am I experiencing kind of the residue of what someone did to me, what I did to myself? Who knows what the source is? It could be emotional, spiritual, physical abuse. It could be just feeling abandoned and alone, isolated, whatever it is. We need to look at that and say, you know, that is a major part of my life. That is a major influence. And sometimes, like when it comes from a parent, well, we'll minimize it because, you know, we don't want to ever say anything bad about a parent because we're supposed to respect our parents. Well, yes, you are supposed to respect the parent, but never are we to honor or respect something that's dishonorable. A fallen leader should not be honored, and that includes a parent. So we've got to look at the reality of it, even though we might want to minimize it because maybe we idealize the person, or we just don't want to go through the pain of dealing with it. So we, rather than like when someone dies, if you don't grieve that death is still troubling you 5 years later. But if you go through the grieving process, which is very painful, but it's God's gift to us to free us from that intense pain coming upon us every single day. So whatever it is that you're struggling with, we've got a path and a process. Now, a lot of people, as I was talking about being the decider, you've also got to be the developer of your life, where you're not waiting for it to get better, waiting for somebody to fix you or the miracle from God. You have to bring the good things into your life. You have to go to that Bible study or get that counseling or develop that system of friends that can support you. And too often, rather than deal with the abuse or the wound or the trauma, we're just waiting for something to happen. And we've seen people wait years and waste years, when if they would just decide to deal with it, life could be different today or tomorrow.
Wow. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about what it means to become a decider, a defender, and a developer. We've looked at some of the reactive life, but now we're going to look at the responsive life. And certainly, if you would like to know more about this particular book, go to the website, pointofview.net. And of course, we have a link there to New Life Ministries. We have information about the book, information about Stephen Arterburn, as well as the workshops, in case you would like to attend those as well. But just before we take a break, one of our action items that we have for you this week has to do with our concern that the end of this month, now that it's September, the end of September, September 30th, the United States will turn over control of the internet to a United Nations body. This is not a good thing. And as we've pointed out before, some of the few countries that have spoken out in favor of it are countries like China and Russia. When they're endorsing it, this is not a good idea. And you might say, well, how in the world did this take place? Well, President Obama's pushing ahead, even though on 2 separate occasions, Congress has voted to block this. So this is why we think it is very important for you to contact your 2 senators and your representative. If you don't know who those are, the good news is as you go to our website, pointofview.net, and go to our action alert, just click on that button. Then if you know your address, that's all you really need to know, because the computer then will pop up your 2 senators and your representative and have all the information necessary for you to send a note. You might say, well, I'm not sure what I want to say. Well, we've given you a sample letter. You can, of course, edit it or amend it in any way you might want to do so. But again, once that's where you want it to be, you can hit the message submit, and then you will have contacted your 2 senators and your representative. And so again, this is one of the action items we've been giving to you this week. And if you've already responded, thank you for doing so. But if this is the first time you've heard about it, or you've still been postponing that particular action as we go to a break, you can do it very easily, even while you're during the break. And certainly we would encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net, express to your members of Congress your concern about turning the internet over to the United Nations. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
What does a hero look like? I remember a woman stricken with MS. She was in a wheelchair, and every week after church, people would get down on a knee and greet her and pray for her. But do you know what caught my eye? The seemingly invisible man behind the wheelchair, silently caring for his beloved, sacrificing for her. In the Bible, Jesus talked about a big giver who had a marching band come with him as he dumped his treasure in the temple coffers. But Jesus saw a woman who gave a tiny gift that was actually huge. If you appreciate Point of View but can't give $30 or $65 or more, well, get this. If every listener gave $5, it would pay our bills for the next 3 years. 3 years. Give $5 today. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Thank you for being our hero. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Privileged to have with us today Stephen Arterburn. Again, he is the chairman of New Life Ministries, the host of New Life Live, as well as the New Life TV program, co-author of this book with David Stoop, which is published by Tyndale, Take Your Life Back, How to Stop Letting the Past and Other People Control You. We've talked about the reactive life. Stephen, let's, if we can, now talk about the responsive life. And you're really talking about how we, in a sense, begin the journey to take our life back. So explain what needs to take place, because you have a section here where you talk about finding self-compassion. What does that mean?
Well, I've had a lot of people say to me, especially in the aftermath of some of the crummy decisions I've made, they'll say, well, you're awfully hard on yourself, aren't you? And I will say, yeah, I am hard on myself. And so I had to learn to be as compassionate with myself as I am with other people. Well, before you can be compassionate with yourself, you probably need to practice on some other people. One of the things I've seen in so many marriages where they're really stuck is, we talk about agape love and erotic love and all these different kinds of love. And we often forget this compassionate love where we truly, see where another person is hurting. And rather than hold it against them, blame them for our pain, we're compassionate with them. We want to help them. And I've often said, some people are more compassionate about seeing a dog on the side of the road that's been hit by a car. They'll do anything, take him to the vet, get him help. They're more compassionate for that animal than they are the person that they've chosen to live with for their whole life. So part of taking your life back is, rather than blame the other person or really hold it against them for everything you're feeling, is that you start to be compassionate for yourself and compassionate for them. And then now we've got some of God's grace flowing here in this relationship. But it begins, often practicing on someone else. And then, we can start to be compassionate with ourselves, give ourselves a break for the things that we did. We've got to tell ourselves sometimes, you know what, I did the best I could with the information that I had, or I would never do that again. I've grown from that. I'm a different person now. All of that's involved in responding with compassion rather than reacting with shame, judgment, and blame and self-condemnation.
Very good. Well, that brings us to what I think is perhaps one of the most important chapters in your book, and all of them are very relevant, but becoming a decider, defender, and developer. Let's take each one. First of all, what does it mean to actually learning how to decide? Can you take us through that process?
Yeah, when we're growing up, we do need some folks to make decisions for us, or we'll ruin our lives before we ever get out of the house. But some people think that somebody else has the right to decide. I wrote a book called Toxic Faith, and throughout that book, there are examples of people, they go to a church, and they think because they go to that church, the pastor has decision power for them. And so you'll hear the bizarre things of, he picked who I would date, or he picked who I would marry. The pastor was making all these choices. And this is not an exaggeration. There was actually a pastor in Hawaii that I did a little research on and found out that he was telling his people what toothpaste they should use for various reasons. Now, if you go to a church where your pastor's helping you decide on a toothpaste brand, that's a problem. So, but same with marriage. We hear this concept of that submission means that he's now the decider. And then I'll hear a guy say, hey, listen, I'm not the decider. We both decide on things. Now, if there is some area we can't agree on, I'm the tiebreaker. And I go, no, wait a second. That means she can decide as long as she agrees with you. But then if you don't agree, rather than continue to work on that problem, rather than come up with a solution you both like, you become the decider. So in reality, she isn't allowed to make a choice on her own. And I just, I wrote a book with Fred Stoker called Every Man's Marriage, and it's on mutual submission, which is what I really believe God intends for us. That is not a liberal thought. That's a very fundamental thought that comes right out of the Bible, where it says, submit yourselves one to another. A lot of people forget that verse is in there. But when we do that, we allow the person we're married to make choices. We encourage, and we believe in that. We step up and we make some choices too.
Might just mention, you talked about that in passing. For those of you that might have been in an abusive church or even are in one right now, that book Toxic Faith that you and Jack Felton wrote many years ago would be very helpful. And certainly you just mentioned in passing, but it's certainly one that I keep running into, and I know you do as well, because lots of times churches don't address that. Even Christian ministries don't. So I appreciate the fact that you did. But the first part is, of course, becoming a decider and learning to decide. It seems sort of obvious until you realize, as you point out, how in some cases people look like they are making decisions, but really someone else is pulling their strings. But then you talk about not only learning to decide, but learning to defend. You sort of addressed that a little bit, but let's come back to that idea of moving from being a decider to a defender. What does that involve?
Well, if you don't think you have honor and value, which, we're all made by the Lord and knit in our mother's womb, but if you don't think you have value and honor, then you're not going to defend it. And we don't want to be defensive about areas that, we definitely need to change and all. But being a defender means that when somebody tries to put you in a place where there isn't value for you, where you're seen as second place, then you need to be willing to defend yourself. In the paper yesterday was a story of a young girl who was sexually assaulted at a university. And she's just now speaking about this 2 years later. But she went before the court and she testified in her own behalf. And essentially she was saying, I had value, and this man stole my honor when he sexually assaulted me. And she defended her position on this and her repeatedly saying no and trying to resist. Now, that's a pretty extreme example of someone who felt that they deserve to defend themselves. And so all of us need to also, in these smaller areas, feel like you've got enough value rather than roll over and play dead, but to defend the value of your life that God has put in you.
And that's like leaving the house, leaving the room, telling someone no, all sorts of things in which you are defending yourself, or in some cases defending someone else. Just before we take another break, let's take the other one. Decider, defender, then developer. We've already talked about how to be a decider and defender, and how that can utilize tough love. But what does it mean to be a developer then?
Well, the person that isn't developing their own life, they're waiting for God to perform a miracle, and often perform the miracle on another person. Or they're waiting for somebody to fix them. We have this phrase called learned helplessness, where we're just waiting for somebody to help us. But when you're your own developer, you're going to the support group or the Bible study. You're looking at the seminar to take or the book to read. You're developing the good things into your life. And the Bible tells us that when we don't pay attention to this, then the evil things come in, and they're the things that start to develop in our life. So we all want to take responsibility, not just for avoiding sin, but developing the good things that we need to grow in character and also grow as children of God.
Let's take a break. 1-800-351-1212. I have a lot of time in the second hour to take your calls, but if you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Also, you might just want to sit back and take some notes on some of this. And as we talk about this book today, Take Your Life Back, How to Stop Letting the Past and Other People Control You, we encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. That is information about Stephen Arterburn. You can go to newlife.com. We already have a link there to Take Your Life Back and the workshop, as well as information about the book. And you might be able to find the book in your local bookstore. It's published by Tyndale, but if not, we've given you all the links necessary that you can be doing the hard work, but also the very important work of taking your life back. And when we come back, we'll talk about some of the steps of life recovery. Is it possible to actually cut those cords and cut those various connections that are actually manipulating you? It could be another person. It could be an event in your past. But let's, if we can, turn you away from being a puppet or a marionette to control by strings. Let's cut those strings and give you true freedom in Jesus Christ. We'll continue our conversation with Stephen Arterburn right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Stephen Arterburn with us for just a few more minutes. Again, chairman of New Life Ministries, the host of New Life Live, the radio talk show, as well as New Life TV. Let me also mention we have a link to newlife.com and information about the workshop, which goes along with this book. There is, of course, a weekend conference coming up October 21st to the 23rd. It's in California. Certainly for our listeners in California and Nevada, that's a very easy drive. But for all of you, let me just encourage you that if this is something that has really vexed you or plagued you for the rest of your life, it's something that you might want to attend. So I wanted to tell you ahead of time so you can book an airline flight and make your way to that conference. And there's all sorts of information on their website. But Stephen, just before we spend a little more time talking about the conference and even what's on your website, I mentioned that there are steps to actually get freedom. And that's important because there are a lot of people right now that are saying, okay, you're talking about me. This is exactly what I'm dealing with. But can you take us through some of the steps of what you call life recovery?
Yeah, Dave Stoop writes about this on page 133. And the first step is you have to change your thinking. Most people are thinking, well, there's a person in my life that needs to change. I can change that person. When I change that person, my life's going to be better. Until they change, I'm trapped, and I've tried everything. And he says, you got to change your thinking to, well, wait a second. I can't change that other person, but I can change me. You got to think, life's going to get better when I change me and make it better. I'm not trapped. What I really am is I'm committed, and I can move beyond feeling trapped and getting back into freedom when, I make a bold move. And a lot of people don't make the move because they think, well, I've tried everything. When in reality, you've tried everything you know to do, but there's some other things that you might want to look at that you could try that you're not aware of. So that's why we got to have good counselors. We got to have good pastors sending us to good places, but we've got to have willingness. And then, beyond that, you take responsibility. Then you start to literally deal with unforgiveness or the fears that have overwhelmed you, or maybe it is, like I was saying earlier, the shame that's in your life. And in dealing with it, a lot of times it's grief work to let something go, accept the reality of it, and grieve it so that we can let it go and be replaced with something that is healthier. And then, you end up going through this, and now you're kind of driven to go help somebody else get out of whatever they feel like they're trapped in. It's a pretty wonderful thing to see so many people go from misery and despair to hope and healing, and then doing whatever they can to usher other people into that same process.
Just before I let you go, let's talk about the website, and it's newlife.com, but talk about the workshop as well as some of the other resources that you might have that are available to some of our listeners.
Well, you can go to newlife.com. You can pre-order the book. There's a workbook. There's also a devotional. The workshop, the 21st, we've been working for 20 years to make these the most valuable in 48 hours that you can go to. And so if you join us there, you're not going to leave the same because we bring in these counselors, we bring in the best communicators, and we just take you through a healing process that, we've had thousands of people do this, and it really is an amazing, life-changing experience that we want for everybody. You can just call us at 1-800-NEW-LIFE.
Very good. Well, just you're starting to cut out here, so let me just again mention the book is entitled Take Your Life Back, Stephen Arterburn, David Stoop. The book is not out yet. I've actually been working off at an unedited edition, advanced reader copy, but it will be out shortly. And, of course, the conference and the workshop we were talking about there in October. And Stephen Arterburn, thank you so very much for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. God bless.
And again, let me just mention that we have all the information about him and about New Life on our website, pointofview.net. And just before we take a break, let me just mention that in the second hour, we're going to get into the political process once again. First of all, there is at least one poll out saying that Donald Trump is ahead of Hillary Clinton. Now, again, we don't want to take too many of these polls seriously because of all sorts of things I've talked about in the past, but we'll get into that. Donald Trump was in Mexico and then came back and gave a speech saying that Mexico will pay for the wall. No one in leadership in Mexico saying that. But he also, in a memo, reveals how he would force Mexico to pay for that border wall. We're going to go through some of the things that he said last night in terms of not only building the wall, but a variety of other issues, the whole issue of catch and release, that they would not just move them across the border, but take them much further into that country of origin. using Dwight Eisenhower, by the way, as an example for that, to block funding for sanctuary cities, to have zero tolerance for criminal aliens, and to cancel all these unconstitutional executive orders and enforce these immigration laws. So there's a lot to talk about just with Donald Trump. If we exhaust that, there are many other topics on the table as well. But I suspect that in light of, first of all, Donald Trump's trip to Mexico, his speech yesterday, and some of the proposals, you're going to have some comments about that. And so we're going to open up the phones, give you a chance to join the conversation as we deal with many of those issues. But also, as we go to the break, let me mention again that we have been encouraging you to take some action, and that's why we have an action item. And it has to do with the fact that at the end of this month, on September 30th, the Obama administration will relinquish U.S. control over the domain system function of the Internet. You might say, well, that's not a big deal. We'll just let the United Nations take over that. And the United Nations International Telecommunication Union, they'll be the ones to decide which URL you get and those kinds of things. But I think you can see very quickly that when you have countries like China and Russia that are actually excited about this, maybe the same kind of censorship of the Internet that has happened in those countries, and many others, by the way, might actually begin to develop. And this is why some people are expressing very deep concern about turning over the regulation of the Internet to some other international body. And we've talked about this before. Curtis Ellis has been on the program with us talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He wrote a piece the other day in which he said President Obama is plunging the Internet into a surrender to globalists. That's a piece that was on WorldNet Daily. And even in the Wall Street Journal, you have Gordon Krovitz saying an Internet giveaway to the United Nations. You might say, well, where's Congress in all of this? Well, it turns out that Congress on two separate occasions has voted to block this, but the president is moving forward anyway. And we've even talked with some members of Congress to find out, well, what can we do? And we give you a very reasonable suggestion on our website, pointofview.net. And this is a way in which you can express your opinion to your two senators and your member of Congress. Now, you've never used the system before at Point of View. It's a very unique system because what happens is when you click on the Take Action button and put your address in, it pops up the information on your two senators and your representative. You may know your two senators and you may know your representative in the House of Representatives, but if you don't, the good news is the computer does. It finds that and puts that up there. We then give you a sample note that you can send to your elected representatives, and you can make some modifications on it and then click the button that says Submit. This is something we think is very important. Many countries already prevent their own people from having free access to the Internet. Some people have wondered whether or not this might open the door to that kind of action as well. And it does seem to me that if indeed twice Congress has ordered the National Telecommunications and Information Administration to not let the government contract that gives them oversight over the Internet to lapse, well, Congress has spoken. The president seems like he's going to do it anyway, so maybe it's now time for you to speak. So we have all that information on our website, pointofview.net. We're going to talk about Donald Trump, the wall, Mexico, all that coming up right after this.
If you've been a Christian for any length of time, no doubt you've heard about Jesus feeding thousands with a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. Jesus took something small and turned it into something big. Recently, someone here at Point of View made an interesting discovery. He did some math and figured out that according to the number of faithful listeners we have, if you and every other listener gave $5, it would help Kerby and the team bring you interviews and commentary for not 3 months, but 3 years. You heard me right. If every listener donates just $5, we'd pay what it costs to bring you this needed information for 3 years. And if you urge a friend to join you, you send 5, they send 5, well, you can imagine the impact. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Send $5. Urge a friend to join you. Support Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about the presidential election, but most importantly, talking about Donald Trump traveling first to Mexico and then giving a major speech on the issue of immigration. But before we do so, it's kind of interesting what has happened with the polls, because as we've pointed out on the program, even earlier this week, it seemed as if indeed the polls were tightening, but always Hillary Clinton was ahead. Until now. If you take seriously the poll done by Rasmussen, and they seem to do a pretty good job of determining who is a likely voter, recognize that some of these polls that survey all Americans mean nothing. I mean, they mean something in the sense that it tells you where Americans think about these particular candidates, but the election is going to be decided by those people who go to the polls and vote. Rasmussen and some of the others are a little better at figuring out who is a likely voter. When I call you up or contact you in some way, either face-to-face, through a computer, or through a phone, and ask who you support, the real question that I need to find out is, are you going to vote in November? A lot of people say I'm going to vote, but they really don't vote. And when you start asking other questions like, well, did you vote in the 2012 election? Did you vote in the midterm elections in 2014, and did you vote in the primary in 2016? Those are important questions. So if you take the Rasmussen poll at face value, a lot of things have changed. First of all, it has Donald Trump with 40% of the support, Hillary Clinton 39%. But again, that's of likely voters. But recognize, even looking at their own poll, just a week or two ago, Hillary Clinton had 42%, Donald Trump had 38%. So she was ahead of him by 4 percentage points. Now she's behind him. And as I've pointed out on this program many times before, the only really important question is how you factor in these third-party candidates. Because, as I pointed out before, they may be drawing from particular groups, and that makes all the difference in the world. If you don't think that that's important in a presidential election, look back in the 2000 election. Ralph Nader's 2.5% in Florida was enough to give George W. Bush the victory over Al Gore just in Florida alone. Go back even to his father, when in some ways the assumption is that Bill Clinton beat George Herbert Walker Bush because of the 19 million votes that were cast for Ross Perot. In this particular case, we see that Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, has about 7% of the vote, down from about 9%, which is one of the things I predicted. There was a time in which he had almost 11% of the vote. Now it's down to 7%. As we get closer to the actual election, sometimes thoughts about a third-party candidate begin to fade. Yet, interesting enough, Jill Stein still has about 3% of the vote in the Green Party. Now, it does appear that most of that is pulling either from unaffiliated, those so-called moderates, or those who are independents, but some of Gary Johnson is pulling from a few individuals that would be considered conservative. So kind of interesting. Right now, the best estimates are Gary Johnson draws support from about 8% of Republicans and about 3% of Democrats and about 12% of unaffiliated. And Jill Stein mostly pulls from the independents. But that's something to think about, because that is a poll that was done obviously before what took place yesterday. what took place yesterday in the Trump campaign could be significant. It might actually increase his support, or it might turn it the other direction. That's why I wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about the issue of borders and immigration, and I certainly want to welcome your phone calls. That number is 1-800-351-1212. Now, before we get to Donald Trump, let me look at the issue of borders and boundary walls and fences and everything in a general sense. For those of you that are accessing a computer right now, maybe you have access to a computer, a cell phone, or something like that, I would encourage you to go to Point of View's Facebook page, because as you go there, there is a very telling map. This comes from The Economist. It came out a couple of months ago, but I happened to hear somebody mention it, and it's a very good illustration of how many borders, walls, and fences there are around the world. You know, when we talk about having a border along the actual southern border of the United States, as you look, you realize, well, there's also a border between Mexico and Guatemala and the Latin American area. As you move down to South America, you realize that there is either a completed or border under construction or one planned, which goes entirely around the entire country of Brazil. Then if you go over to Africa, you realize there are all sorts of boundaries there, some which are planned, others which are in construction, some to protect other countries from Tunisia, from Western Africa, or from South Africa. You get over to the Middle East and you recognize that there are borders to actually prevent people from Yemen to getting into Saudi Arabia, not to mention, of course, a very famous border, and that is the wall that was built in Israel. As you work your way up into Europe, you see that there are various borders there, not the least of which is that there were a number of people that were very critical of the current president of Hungary, because he kind of took his cue from Donald Trump and said, you know, we're going to build a wall. Actually, right now it's a fence, but it's preventing some of those Syrians from coming through his country on the way to Germany. You go into the Stan countries, you see there are borders there. You can look at the borders between India and Pakistan. You can see all sorts of borders in Southeast Asia. And, of course, perhaps one of the most famous borders is the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea. So if you have time, go to the Point of View Facebook page. You'll see that diagram, that map, and it reminds you that borders are important. And yet we live in a world right now where many people question the value of those borders. I mentioned it the other day, and just before we take a break, let me just mention again that the president, or the head of the European Union, the other day said that borders are the worst invention ever made by politicians. And if you think he's unique in that statement, I also, in a commentary coming out next week, I have a quote from George Soros that talked about national borders are the obstacle. So you're starting to see that this is becoming quite a debate issue. And so one of the articles I've posted here by our good friend Michael Barone, maybe borders aren't the worst invention after all. And so it's really just a reminder that we're starting to see two very different views. Some of the leaders in the European Union are saying, you know, we don't need these borders anymore. After all, Europe is just kind of like the United States of Europe, and you don't have to have major borders between the states and the United States, so why should we have borders there? Then you have others saying, this has not worked well. We have almost 1 million individuals coming from Syria and other parts of the Middle East that have just been like a flood into our country. So you have a real interesting debate taking place in the EU. And you know what? We have a debate taking place right now in the presidential election. So after the break, what I want to do is talk about what Donald Trump has said and how he plans to build the wall and how he plans to pay for it. What else he wants to do besides building a wall. And I really want to invite you to join the conversation today. 1-800-351-1212. What are your thoughts about building a wall? What are your thoughts about immigration? What are your thoughts about Donald Trump? We'll talk all about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Bill Nye is known as the science guy. His recent YouTube videos make him more of a pro-abortion guy who attempts to argue for abortion on the basis of his scientific understanding. Professors Robert George and Patrick Lee point out in a recent column that it appears the science guy is the one who does not understand logic and science. Bill Nye's videos many times use a non sequitur to make a point. This is a logical fallacy where the conclusion does not follow from the original statement. A good example is his discussion of the many fertilized embryos that do not result in newborn babies. Robert George and Patrick Lee remind us that the fact that many human embryos die at an early stage of development does not mean that they are not embryonic human beings. The high rate of infant mortality in many parts of the country doesn't mean that these infants were not human beings. At the core of his video is an attempt to pit religion against science. Those of us who are pro-life have nothing more than deeply held beliefs based upon a book written 5,000 years ago that says that when a man and a woman have sexual intercourse, they always have a baby. Is any of this true? Many who are pro-life have come to that conclusion apart from the Bible, but based upon the scientific fact that a human being begins at fertilization. Even the oldest parts of the Bible weren't written 5,000 years ago. What about his last statement? Robert George and Patrick Lee remind us that no one who is familiar with the Bible would dream of attributing to any such nonsense because it prominently includes stories of married couples such as Abraham and Sarah who desire for children to be frustrated by infertility. This video illustrates the lengths to which pro-abortion advocates must go in order to make their case. Science and logic are actually on the side of those who are pro-life. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join our conversation today, Donald Trump, immigration, and the issue of borders, and whether you like Donald Trump or not, this is a debate that is not just taking place in the United States. That's why I wanted you to understand that certainly we're looking at this right now as Americans, as an American debate. But when you have the head of the European Union who is saying that borders are the worst invention ever made by politicians, that's why I wanted you to be able to read this piece by Michael Barone. Maybe borders aren't the worst invention ever, and we can see why that is certainly the case. And, of course, George Soros and others are saying that national borders are an obstacle. If you have this kind of globalist perspective, then why do you want to have borders? My argument is very simple. If you want to have a country, you need to have borders. And if you don't have borders, you really don't have a country. But let's see if we can get into some of the things that were presented by Donald Trump at a rally in Phoenix, Arizona. We really wanted to give you a chance to kind of hear some of this. And so Donald Trump had a chance to meet with the Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto in Mexico. And it was apparently a fairly cordial joint press conference, and there wasn't really much talk about who was going to pay for it, but everyone from Peña all the way back to Vicente Fox have said there is no way to consider Mexico paying for it. So in just a minute, I want to talk about how he, that is Donald Trump, believes that he will. But for a moment, let me just present his plan, because it's a lot more than just a wall, and we will get into the wall in just a minute. But his argument has simply been that it's our right to choose immigrants who we think will be most likely to thrive and flourish and love us. He goes on to say that the well-being of the American people matters. Our greatest compassion must be for the American citizens. And this idea of open borders, which is really kind of what is becoming the de facto presentation by the Democratic Party, is something that we should recognize is much more alike what some of the leaders in the European Union are talking about, not something like we've had here before in the United States. Matter of fact, I might just mention that the next issue of Outlook magazine, which we send to those of you that support this ministry, does a comparison between the Republican platform, posted the Republican Democratic platform on our website, pointofview.net. You can read it for yourself, but you can begin to see that there is going to be a very stark difference in this presidential campaign, and certainly in the upcoming debates that'll take place. The first presidential debate takes place later this month, September 26th, at Hofstra University in New York. You're going to see a real difference there, and you're also going to see a real difference because of the party platform between many of the candidates running for the U.S. Senate and running for the House of Representatives. And so I think we're going to perhaps in this election resolve whether or not we're going to continue with what essentially are, in many parts of the country, open borders, where individuals are crossing our border, or they're coming here on a visa, but they're overstaying their visas, or in one way or another manipulating the system so that they can be in this country. And so let's, if we can, look at maybe 5 points. And if you're taking some notes, you might want to write these down real quickly. And, of course, along the way, I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. The first one, of course, we've talked about, and I'll come back in just a minute to talk about how to pay for it, is to build a great wall across the southern border. I love how he calls it a Great Wall. I mean, we have the Great Wall of China. I don't think this is going to be anything like this. But nevertheless, the crowd chanted, "Build the wall," and he talked about the fact that the Mexican government will pay for it 100%. And in some respects, it will be more than just a wall. Because some people say, well, a wall, all I have to do is have a ladder and I climb over the wall. Well, first of all, find a ladder in the middle of the desert. That's going to be a little tough. But it will also include the best technology in order to find the tunnels and things of that nature. And so, again, that's the first kind of obvious issue that he's best known for. But let's look at the other 4. Number 1 is the wall. Number 2, the issue of catch and release. I've talked about this before. You know, catch and release is great when you're a fly fisherman, but it's not exactly what we need right now. And interestingly enough, we've had, even sitting in this chair last week, Representative Louis Gohmert. And I remember in one of his congressional hearings where they talked about catching individuals and deporting them. And deporting meant we would take them to the border and we would ask them to walk across the bridge. And Louis, in his inimitable way, said, well, did you stay long enough to see whether or not they just walked right back? And everybody thought that was a silly question. I thought, it's not silly at all. Because as Donald Trump mentioned the other night, this is an important issue. He said anyone who illegally crosses the border will be detained until they're moved out of the country. But he went on to say, we can't just tell them to walk across the bridge, because then they'll just come back again. The idea, and this is one that he accredited to President Eisenhower, so you got to go back to the 1950s when they had this program, was to deport individuals into the interior of the country. It makes no sense to drop them off at Laredo or El Paso and say, okay, walk across the bridge or cross the water or something like that, because they'll just come right back again. Let's at least make it a little more difficult for somebody who wants to return to this country illegally. So that's the second idea. Number 1 is the wall. Number 2 is the end to what we call catch and release. Number 3 is this idea of zero tolerance for criminal aliens. Donald Trump said, we will begin moving them out day 1 in joint operation with local, state, and federal law enforcement. He went on to say, they know who these people are. My first hour in office, these people are gone. Not so sure that's really true, but it's great rhetorical flourish. But it has to do with, again, one strike and you're out. You know, there are just all sorts of people that have really tried to implement this, including the so-called Cates Law, which is Kate Steinle, who was killed in San Francisco. If an individual is here illegally and they've actually participated in any criminal act, that's enough to simply remove them. in various ways. And so, again, passing Kate's Law might be one of those things that would be front and center in a Trump administration. And then, of course, he had to get his little dig in. He said, we need to deport criminals who have evaded justice, just like Hillary Clinton. Maybe they'll deport her. Of course, you can imagine the cheers that came up for that one. So that's zero tolerance. Two more real quickly, and then we'll open up for some of your phone calls. The fourth is to block funding to sanctuary cities. I'm going to see if we can post a map that I've seen produced where it shows where all these sanctuary cities might be. And by cities, I mean that in the broadest sense because some of these are jurisdictions. But the best estimate from ICE and from the federal government is there is at least 300 jurisdictions which are presently not enforcing immigration law. Now, we always get this, well, there's nothing we can do. Think this through for just a minute. Those of you in North Carolina, when North Carolina said, we really don't want to implement President Obama's transgender policies, did you have the administration say, wait, there's nothing we can do about this? We can't possibly enforce transgender policies. What did they do? Immediately threatened to remove funding. So when it's an issue that President Obama believes in, we're ready to bring the entire weight of the federal government down on a state to make them comply. But when you have all these sanctuary cities that exist where individuals actually are flaunting the law, well, there's just nothing we can do. And then finally, of course, as I mentioned just a minute ago, to cancel unconstitutional executive orders and to begin to enforce immigration laws. That will also get us into issues of E-Verify and the rest, but we need to take a break. And so while we do so, let me mention just one more time, one of the things that we've been encouraging you to do as an action item is to go to our website because we are concerned that this administration wants to give away control of the internet. And if you haven't taken the time to take some action, please visit the website pointofview.net, and this will be an important issue because at the end of this month, we will no longer have control over some very important issues, not the least of which is control over domain names and system functions. This could very easily devolve into something which we would begin to regret because of the tremendous freedom that we have here in the United States and on the internet. If you have a globalist body taking over, we're concerned. So again, we ask you, if you would, to go to our website, pointofview.net, take the time to click on that button, and we have given you a suggested letter that you can send to your 2 senators and your representative. You might say, well, I don't know who they are. Good news is the computer does. As long as you know your address, you're good. It will pop up your 2 senators, your representative. We've given you a sample letter. You can change it any way you want, and then you can click the button that says submit, and that is a way to begin some action which is desperately needed. Congress 2 times has voted against this, but the president's moving ahead. That's why we think it's time for you to take some action. And if you'd like to join us, I'd love to hear your phone calls and hear from you. So the lines are open. We'd love to hear what you have to say. 1-800-351-1212. 1-800-351-1212. Take those calls right after this.
What does a hero look like? I remember a woman stricken with MS. She was in a wheelchair, and every week after church, people would get down on a knee and greet her and pray for her. But do you know what caught my eye? The seemingly invisible man behind the wheelchair, silently caring for his beloved, sacrificing for her. In the Bible, Jesus talked about a big giver who had a marching band come with him as he dumped his treasure in the temple coffers. But Jesus saw a woman who gave a tiny gift that was actually huge. If you appreciate Point of View but can't give $30 or $65 or more, well, get this. If every listener gave $5, it would pay our bills for the next 3 years. 3 years. Give $5 today. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Thank you for being our hero. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Been talking about some of the things in the speech by Donald Trump, 5 different points, and we came to a break, so I didn't get a chance to talk about this idea under unconstitutional executive orders and enforcing all immigration laws. He said, of course, no amnesty and wanting to actually have a more secure visa tracking system as well as E-Verify. There are all sorts of other issues we can talk about, but we've got a full bank of phone calls, so let's get a chance to hear from some of you, your thoughts about Donald Trump, about immigration. Of course, we've also been talking about control of the internet and even the presidential campaign. All of that is fair game this last half hour on Open Line, 1-800-351-1212. We'll head first to Georgia on the Good News Network. Tony, you have the floor.
I appreciate you, Kerby. I think he did an excellent job. I mean, 'cause like I said, if only the African-American community would take time and meticulously listen to him. I mean, because like I said, he was hitting on all cylinders. I mean, out of all the things that have been going on with the country, he was tapping into and bringing it all together on how authority needs to be given back to the people. You know, us having to make a choice about who we allow to come in the country, all these things. I mean, he was just like, I'll admit, I was just screaming at the TV. He was doing such a great job. You know?
Let me pick up on that, because if you're concerned about black unemployment, and especially black teenage unemployment, you recognize what has happened to the black community in large part with these open border policies. And that's not even open for debate. We can disagree about certain issues, but you can look at any of the work done by Walter Williams, Thomas Sowell, who, by the way, are both African-American economists, who have documented very well how black unemployment has been affected in detrimental ways because of our open border policies. So are we going to continue down that road, or are we going to say, maybe we've made a mistake here, maybe we need to at least turn the water off to deal with the flood before we try to go any further down this road and affect the American citizens in a negative way?
Exactly. I mean, it's just that when you listen to someone like Donald Trump, I mean, down to earth, common sense, I mean, and it's like the other side, they take some anything that he say and they flip it on its head and it be just another lie from the left. I mean, I'll be saying to myself, how is it that people miss all of this? And then out of all the stuff that they have on Hillary Clinton now, you would think that her numbers would be totally in the tank by now.
Well, they are beginning to drop. And frankly, let's be honest, Donald Trump's not the best candidate to run against Hillary Clinton. We've talked about that before. I think there are other candidates that if they're running right now, this would be a landslide in the other direction. But anyway, we'll see how this plays itself out. So, Tony, I appreciate your phone call. I'm just moving down the road because when we have a full bank of phone calls, I want to give everybody a chance. So, Dwayne, you have the floor. What would you like to add?
Hey, Kerby, good to be with you. I want to talk about the internet transfer, and then I actually would like to make one quick comment about Trump. And
sure.
I think we forget that Pence is on the team. And just hypothetically, should something, maybe an illness, take Trump out of the picture, let's say after he's elected, we would have a nice, something else we can look at.
Mike Pence, yeah, I have such high respect for Mike Pence, both personally as well as professionally. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Okay, so this internet thing, 2 points. One, if Congress has blocked it twice, and they have the purse strings, from my understanding of all things that really happen, is there any kind of funding or something that they can just say, well, you can do what you want to do, but we are not going to fund it? I don't understand how somebody anyway has the keys, or how did even America get the keys to the internet? Wasn't it like it all started somewhere in Switzerland or something?
A lot of it actually was developed here, but
okay.
Of course, really what you're really getting down to is, of course, Al Gore invented it, right? I'm being facetious, of course, but you have what are called the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. And that is because you just had to have somebody be able to control it. For a short period of time, the internet was kind of like the Wild Wild West. And they said, wait a minute, we can't have this. We need to have people have a unique ISP. I won't go into all the details because your eyes will glaze over, but this was something that was really developed in the United States. And so if you wanted to get yourself a website, you had to go through that. Of course, you now have all sorts of second-party and third-party vendors to get that to you, but you had to have somebody make sure that you would not, if you will, take somebody else's website, and you just kind of have the rules of the game. Well, that's all that's being transferred right now. So a lot of people are saying, what can go wrong? Oh, don't ask that question, because you know exactly what can go wrong, because then they can begin to figure out various kinds of blocks, or maybe they'll say, maybe you don't really deserve a website because you are seen as a hate group. And, you know, you just see all sorts of things that can happen. And when some of the people that are most excited about this transfer are in China and Russia, that should tell you everything you need to know. And does Congress have the power? Yes, Congress probably will do some things. We had Louis Gohmert in here. We talked to him off air. There's a few things they can do, but I think we just need to strengthen the backbone of Congress right now in order to say this is just not acceptable. The American people may not even be aware of it, and then when they hear it, they go, oh, you got to be kidding. No, I'm not kidding you. This is really something that is going to happen by the end of this month.
Incredible. Thank you for keeping us posted.
And as we know more, we'll keep you posted as well. So again, let's take some more phone calls. We'll go to Bob in Maine, WSEW. Bob, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Kerby, I really enjoy your show. It's very insightful. My comment, I have two quick ones. One is that if we have a world government and the world without borders, where do people go if we have an oppressive government?
Wow, good point.
Where do they flee to?
Yeah. We've oftentimes had Tim Wildman on here and said, where do we sail to? You know, New Zealand, Australia, whatever. I mean, really, borders are important. Anybody that does not think they are has not really thought this through. And again, for those of you that just joined us, we've posted a map. This one comes from The Economist. I want to thank them for that. That came out actually months ago, but it's a nice map to show you that there are borders and fences and walls all over the world, because we're not the only one putting borders in our country. There are many others, and it will help you get a sense about why countries do that. Saudi Arabia doesn't want people coming in from Yemen. Mexico, they really don't want a border on on the Mexican-American border, but they've got a border between them and the Latin American countries. And I mean, this is just silly for us to not realize that borders oftentimes are very important and are the way to control commerce and a way to protect the American people or people in other countries as well.
Right, and wasn't it Reagan that said something like, we're the last great hope for America?
That's right.
For the world, I mean. But also, if we lose the Internet, won't Al Gore be sad?
Yes, I think that would just be terrible, because, after all, he invented the Internet. Good line there. Let's take a few more phone calls. I'll just keep moving because there's so many of you would like to speak today, so we'll give you that opportunity. Let's head now to Arizona in this case. Eddie, thank you for joining us today.
Well, hello there.
Well, hello. What would you like to add to our conversation?
I remember years ago that when Hawaii became its sovereign nation in '92, they were awarded $1 billion. So I asked one of the senators, I said, how about Mexico? Can that ever go Democratic? And he goes, well, if America and Mexico got together and Mexico went Democratic, they will be awarded $350 billion. It's all in the reserve bank. For every country in the world, there's money for each country if they go Democratic.
Huh. And I think you said Hawaii, but were you talking about Panama, really?
Well, in Panama,
yeah.
When the drug lord got caught in Panama,
right.
America owned Panama Canal.
Right.
So that's one of the laws on the books. If a country can't take care of their drug problem, America owns that country. And that's why we have the Panama Canal open for our Navy. Because Noriega got caught with cocaine, and America owned it. we could do that with Mexico and any other country that has a drug problem.
Yeah, doubt that's going to happen, but nevertheless, Donald Trump's called for some really radical things. That one, I think, is even beyond anything he would propose. But, Eddie, I appreciate you reminding us of the fact sometimes we reward countries for going democratic, and I think that would be very helpful for our country. As a matter of fact, if Mexico could solve some of its political and especially economic issues, this would be less of a problem. We don't talk about real great concerns about the border between Canada and the United States. As a matter of fact, I know there's at least one border there where they just have cones up on one road and just say, report when you come in. I mean, we're not worried about Canadians coming in here, although we have been sometimes worried about whether terrorists might try to come in through that entry. So you recognize a lot of it has to do with if the country that you're coming from to this country is meeting your needs, both politically and economically, you're more inclined to stay. But if indeed there's a better life that you can live and you have more freedom by coming to America, I understand why we have the immigration problem. We are a beacon of hope and economic prosperity. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, we'll take your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. Don't forget, we've posted on the Point of View Facebook page a very good map done by The Economist, which shows all the boundary walls and fences worldwide. And just before I take another phone call, let me just mention real quickly, and maybe you can post this, in this 2-page memo Donald Trump sent to the Washington Post, explained how he would force Mexico to pay for the border fence. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that right now there is the possibility, using the Patriot Act, to be able to cut off the funds that are actually sent from this country by Mexicans in this country to Mexico. These are known as money transfers. The technical name are remittances. And his argument is this would be enough easily to pay for the $5 billion. Now, $5 billion is a lot of money, but let's recognize this is a country. Just the federal government alone spends more than $1 trillion every year. $5 billion is kind of like a rounding error. I hate to be so blunt about it, but the argument is about $25 billion each year is sent home by Mexicans living abroad. Now, not all of that comes from the United States. There are Mexicans in other countries that are sending there, but let's recognize that $25 billion comes into the country of Mexico. And if indeed this president, President Trump, or another president, even a President Clinton, don't think she'd do it, but nevertheless, were to say, look, we'll just stop those money transfers, or we'll put a tax on those money transfers, all of a sudden that would change everything, because Mexico, frankly, depends upon a lot of the money that comes from this country that is sent back by individuals who are here either legally or in many cases illegally. So that's a quick answer to that question. We'll get into it a little bit more if you'd like to join the conversation about how Donald Trump would actually force Mexico to pay for the border wall. Let's go to Texas, KBJS. Lance, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my call. As far as the wall goes, I would say that it's from a biblical perspective. A wall is very biblical. There's walls in the Bible. It's a good thing constantly, over and over again. So if you're against the wall, I think you could argue that you're against what the Bible teaches about this. And then the second point, and I'll be done. As far as America goes, this country, before the country was founded, the reason America started was because of the revival that led to the Revolutionary War.
Very true.
So a Christian revival is what started this country. So this country is by far a Christian country. Its foundings are based on it. And my last point, before 1776, the colonies, they used taxpayer money to pay for Harvard and Yale seminaries to create a Christian country. That's all. Thank you.
Yep. And again, the point he's making is one that a lot of people have written about, both Americans and even British. Paul Johnson, for example, his History of the American People, really, in a sense, says that it was the first Great Awakening, Jonathan Edwards and especially George Whitefield, that really gave you the American Revolution. And I've spoken on this before and said it could be said that you would not have had an American Revolution if you had not had this first Great Awakening. And there are reasons for that, not the least of which is the emphasis upon liberty, the questions from people like Jonathan Mayhew as to whether or not civil disobedience would be biblically permissible. In other words, is it ever right to disobey a king? And certainly also the one that we've talked about on this program before, that 80% of the colonists in the eastern seaboard actually had a chance to hear George Whitefield. And because of that, they began to think of themselves more as Americans. It used to be that if you were in the colony of Georgia, you related as a colony back to Britain. If you were a colony in Massachusetts, you related back to England. And you really didn't see yourselves as, quote, Americans. And this nationwide, if you will, it wasn't quite a nation then, but colonial-wide eastern seaboard series of revivals by George Whitefield kind of bound them together. And even during the American Revolution, the British oftentimes referred to the preachers and the pastors as the Black Regiment. Because they wore black robes, the idea was that they were preaching liberty from the pulpits, and they were one of the reasons why there were so many colonists ready to fight for their freedom. So anyway, those are a couple of points that are worth making, and I appreciate, Lance, you adding that to our conversation. Let's go to Roger. What would you like to add to the conversation today?
Yes, I'd like to add that this is not America anymore. This is United Nations, because we got every nation here. And as far as the wall going up, I'm all for Donald Trump. I don't care how they do it. They ought to make something, whatever. But the bottom line is, you take the true people are born and raised here in America to try to get help through the government for this or for that or whatever, or even senior citizens that that you have to go 3 to 5 years to battle with the government. Well, you get a foreigner over here, we give them everything hand and foot. They don't pay no taxes, and boom, 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 this and that. Now, in order to slow the Mexicans down, yes, to me, a few years back ago, we got that president from Panama. I can't think of his name. But anyway, we got him. Yeah, Noriega. We got him in president down here in Miami. And here we did. We sent $700-800 million to his country to help his country.
Yeah, we just talked about that.
Bought drugs and bought guns. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
I think our country here is being blackmailed from all these other little countries. Hey, let's go start a war. Hey, America, you pay us $1 billion and we'll stop it. Well, just like this stuff over Afghanistan, Iran, all this. We've been here about 10, 11, 12 years, and it's still going on. They have to do what they did in World War II, just drop the bomb, start over.
Yeah, well, I don't want to do that. But again, anyway, let's just give at least a few more of you a chance to join the conversations. Let's go to Missouri, KNEO. Michelle, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Yeah, I was just curious. I had a friend come and stay with me from Mexico, and I was talking to her about what she thought about borders and stuff, and she said, well, if anyone came to our country, they would just take them back. And she said, and in fact, when we went she traveled a lot into Europe and stuff, and she said if anyone who was ever illegal tried to get a job, no one would risk it, because no one would risk hiring them because they would lose their company.
Yes.
And it just made me curious why we don't do that in America. I think that would stop people coming over here if they had to risk something to hire somebody,
Well, and that's why, again, and I'm only running up on time here, so that's why they talked about E-Verify, so that, first of all, a company would know that they are hiring somebody who is illegal, and thus then they would be criminally liable, or at least corporately liable, so that may be the case. But one of the quick ways sometimes to end an argument on immigration is to say, look, the people in Mexico are really upset about our policies, so let's just adopt the same policies in America that they have in Mexico. Believe me, those are much more draconian than anything we have here. If you come from Guatemala and you go into Mexico and you're caught, you'll be deported. If you actually, as you said, get a job, that company will face all sorts of reactions and penalties. So it's, again, an important issue to pay attention to. We're simply out of time. I wish I had more time to cover some of those issues, but at least gave a few of you a chance to join the conversation. There will always be opportunities tomorrow on our Friday weekend edition. And so please take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. Take action on our action item, and that will be a great opportunity for you to express your opinion to your 2 senators and your representative. Let me also encourage you, if you appreciate the conversation we've had here today and every day, to maybe think about clicking on that button that says donate. You can help us out, and we would greatly appreciate that. It's all available at the website, pointofview.net. Many of the articles we posted here about borders, about Donald Trump in Mexico are there, and so feel free to take advantage of those. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. See you back here tomorrow on our Friday weekend edition.
If you've been a Christian for any length of time, no doubt you've heard about Jesus feeding thousands with a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. Jesus took something small and turned it into something big. Recently, someone here at Point of View made an interesting discovery. He did some math and figured out that according to the number of faithful listeners we have, if you and every other listener gave $5, it would help Kerby and the team bring you interviews and commentary for not 3 months, but 3 years. You heard me right. If every listener donates just $5, we'd pay what it costs to bring you this needed information for 3 years. And if you urge a friend to join you, you send 5, they send 5, well, you can imagine the impact. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Send $5. Urge a friend to join you. Support Point of View. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.